Hey guys, I'm Ben from BW Design, obviously, and today I'm just going to talk a bit through some projects I've done recently with a studio called Tendril in Toronto. Just a really nice bunch of guys, and we were lucky enough to do a teaser for the new season of American Horror Story in collaboration with Method, Corb, Triz, and of course ourselves, Tendril. And then I'm really just going to talk a little bit about creating sort of design with effects, more so than rather, pyro simulations and destruction, which is stuff that I still do on a daily basis, but most of the work I do is probably a bit more abstract. It's, knitting and growth and a lot of weird stuff like that. So I'll just go through here. So a little bit about me. I'm fairly remote in Australia. I'm in a town from about 14,000 people, so the closest city to me is about 2.5 hours away, so I don't really have a lot of exposure to any kind of studios or anything like that. I'm often on my own and I just make connections through the web. I'm usually working on short form stuff like commercials and TV shows. I did do a little bit of film work this year and it was okay, but I definitely prefer projects that are, quicker turnaround. I've put together just a little bit of a reel here. It's pretty short, but it'll just give you probably an idea of the work that I do if you haven't seen it before, so play that now. All right, so it's a bit of everything. What I want to talk about first is sort of controlling effects. When we're doing effects work, we're always usually coming up with something that sort of has to be turned on, and usually it's not something that's turned on suddenly. So like a gradual thing. And I'm not the type of guy that's big into building digital assets, funnily enough. I've got a couple that I keep around, but I think I like to rebuild stuff just to keep my mind sharp and, just to make sure that I'm not forgetting, little bits of Vex or whatever that I've sort of learned over the time that I've been using Houdini, which is probably about 3.5 years, by the way, if anyone's wondering. So I'm just going to play this little video here. This is an asset that I'm just going to sort of demo. It's not meant to look pretty or anything. It's just sort of showing that in this asset, I'm showing like different ways you can apply like a vector attribute in this case to like a surface, and it's just displacing the surface here. But the important thing is like you can time it. You can tell it how many frames it's going to go for, what axis it's going to work on. If it's radial, if it's linear, all that sort of stuff. And it's essentially applying UVs within itself. So you can basically run it across an object or a surface and just get stuff done really quickly. Because, if you don't have a tool like this, or, I guess, or you don't figure out how to build one, you're going to find yourself in a world of pain in a lot of circumstances with controlling this stuff. So here on the second one, what I wanted to talk about with this was I made the option to do this in just black and white or RGB, and that's say for if you wanted to create a leading edge on an object, but then like cull out the rest of the surface. So what you'll see here is I'm making the alpha 0 just for the viewport as it goes across, which depicts it sort of being eaten away and leaving that void behind. So it's just a thing essentially that you can slap on any into any job basically and just drive your stuff. This could be activating rigid bodies, it can do anything. You can put this on curves and create offsets, grow stuff. It's just, and really all it is, it just assigns, like I said, a UV texture, and then you translate that U attribute. And like I said, I've got a bunch of stuff built in here which controls how many frames and stuff that runs for. So just showing the offsets here, you can probably imagine how this would be very handy to have, and it's just so easy to build. So yeah, I just wanted to explain that first, because when I continue on, you'll probably see some examples of where this is used. You know, you've got these ramps where you can cut out the tails of the trails in this example, but this is all real time, of course, there's no simulating. So yeah, just wait till this finishes, should be nearly done. All right, cool. So this brings me to the first major thing I'm going to talk about here. As I said at the start, we did this project, which is like a dream job for me. I was busy when this came along, and Tendril come to me, and once they told me what it was, I said, I'm in. Like, I don't care if I work all day and night, I'm doing this thing, because I'm a huge fan of this show, so it was going to happen no matter what. So yeah, we dived in, and what I'm going to do first is just play the spot. This is the entire thing with Corb, the Corb part, the method part, and the Triz part. There's also, Effects have their own in-house team of guys that worked on this. So let me just, it's got pretty quiet audio, so if we can turn it up a little bit. It's pretty gross, so. So we did the part with the fig, when we see the fig.
If you're curious to see all the tricks out of my sleeve, all you find is yours to keep.
So bad.
If I am brave enough to the desires that you seek, hold my hand, I'll set you free.
So there it is. I know it's pretty out there, it's pretty abstract, but I love that.
Find is yours.
And this is just our spot on its own. Okay, so my tasks were to, initially I was doing the fig opening, and I created a rig for that. But what happened was, like, I only had 10 days to pull all this together, all the effects for it. So we spoke about it, Tendril and I, and we decided, because there'd be quite a few animation changes with the scorpions, they're quite intricate the way they move, it'd just be better if they had their animators tackle that. So what I did was, the skin wrinkling as a nail comes across, which you may or may not have caught that. I'll show it here. And then when they come out, there's there's little stringy gooey bits that are attached to the scorpions. And also I did a variable viscosity flip sim of all the stuff coming out of the fig, which had seeds in it too, but you'll see that here. So what this is just showing like the methodology behind like those stringy little bits of sticky stuff. And so all it is essentially is I make a set of points on one object, create IDs for that object, and then I'm just duplicating that and moving it away in space. And then I can use the add node with the IDs to make connections like this, so you can see the second set's the one moving around. I go into a for each loop, and I create a distance attribute between 0.0 and 0.1, and then and I resample the curve at the same time, which creates a curve view attribute, and that propagates onto the resampled points. And then basically I'm able to, I think I created a primitive ID up above, or in there somewhere too, might have missed that. But what that allows me to do per primitive is create a random amount of gravity and make it stretch out based on distance and things like that, which you can see I'm sort of just fiddling around here, just getting a feel for what these settings do. And then just a couple lines of vex to say if it drops below the ground level, just flatten it, basically. You can kind of see that here. Super simple, like anyone can, I'm sure, can pull this together. I didn't click on the smooth, the smooth node though, which makes it look so much better. I should have done that. And then poly wire, because above that with p-scale, I'm actually adding a random p-scale value per point along the length. So it looks a bit rubbish there, but when you render it, whoops, sorry, when you render that, it actually, it looks pretty nice. Sorry, I screwed that up. I'll just go back through here, because I'll just move on to the next part. Okay, so these are the rest of the effects that I did for the spot. And they're just little screen recordings. So I'm not sure if you can see it, the little stringy bits on the scorpions. That's that technique I just showed you. And so it's like, and there's a variable viscosity sim. You can see the chunky bits in there. Just assigning like a black and white map to that stuff before it goes into the sim. And then I take a percentage based on the ID from that and instant seeds into there. And here's the wrinkly skin. So this is using that asset I talked about early on when I said about controlling effects, where we just wipe across the surface and then we can displace it. So that was the American Horror Story spot. It was really, really fun. And as I said, the guys at Tendril are phenomenal to work with. So if you ever get the chance to work with those guys, definitely take it. They're not paying me. All right, not much. So here's, we're going to channel our inner grandma here. I'm going to talk about this knitting setup. I've got so many questions about knitting in Houdini. I don't know what the fascination with it is. People just love it. And there's been a few guys over probably the last couple of years as this sort of more abstract type of, I don't know, trend happens with Houdini, doing this in their talks and things, talking about techniques. This one, I don't think people have talked about before. I created this like 2 years ago. I was doing an Air Max, a Nike Air Max commercial with a German studio, and as always happens, you do a ton of R&D and lots of it doesn't get used. So this was just something I come up with. Back then, you should have seen the setup. It was horrendous. I didn't know what I was doing. It was slow as hell, and so I rebuilt it and brought it into 2018. Here, probably good if I show it. Yeah, it's kind of, it's good for like, you know, a medium close shot. There's a bit of detail and stuff in there, and I kind of coloured the threads gold, every X primitive and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, like I said, I don't know what it is. People just seem to like this sort of stuff. This looks okay to me, but it looks a little bit static. So I did this other version, just, it was like last minute, where I made like the threads kind of, I don't know, have a bit of motion to them. They just look a bit more alive. So I'm going to talk about the setup now. We'll step through it and explain exactly what it takes to make an effect like this and what it is. So it's actually really simple. So what I'm going to do though is start with this guy here on the screen. So this is just, you know, you just draw a loop and you connect it in a row and then just duplicate it, just so you know. I didn't want to do this here because it's a waste of time, but that's all that is. It's just like there's a row or a primitive per row, basically, so you know that in your mind as I go through this. Whoops, I'm horrible at this thing. Here we go. So we'll just start off with that, and then what I'm going to do is step off to the side and create a super simplified version of the concept, so we know what's happening here before I refine it and make it look a bit better. So we've got 22 primitives in total. I assign a primitive ID, you know, so we can create variation per row. And we go into this thing, so we're just looking at one in this for each loop. I'll resample it just to smooth it out a bit and create this curve view attribute, which is a 0 to 1 value along the length of the curve. I'm going to store this current position in a rest attribute, and then what I need to do is like take the loops out of it, right? But that puts it, offsets it in space, and I just use a match size just to snap it back to where it was originally. And there's probably a more elegant way to do this. In fact, I know there is, but I was just lazy and did it like that. So the end result is a bunch of straight lines, okay? So we've stored our curvy lines, and then you get a copy of that, you shove it off over in space, just doesn't matter where, you can twist it, rotate it, whatever. So we've got one up here and one down here now, which you'll see if I template that correctly. Here's my asset again. I've called it Morph1. If you're interested, doesn't really matter. And then I'm having a look with the visualize node. I don't know if you guys use these nodes. I use them all the time. That's what it's going to look like. That's how it's going to activate. It's got the offsets built into this asset currently. And that's just subtracting an amount from whatever's in there. And so that's it. Like there it is. Like it's in its rawest form. It's just taken these guys up here and shoving them across here. It's a morph, essentially, a position mix. And this is where these assets are fun. You can just move, the ramps around and just play with this to get the results you want. You can make them look tighter or looser. You can even do this where you end up with these funny looking rounded loops, which is pretty useless, but you can imagine if you had to do visualization or a still or something, you could use that. Here I've got overshoot, so they're just shooting down a little bit further than what they're meant to, I guess. But in the end, I kind of just settled for something that looks like that, And then this is where you go back to the ones you've moved off in space, so you can make them look tighter, or just rotate them around, give them a bit of a twist, which I think I do here. There you go. So, it's probably not the most flexible thing, but I've done versions before though where I've like snapped it to like objects and projected it back onto the surface, and that looks quite cool. Instead of just a floating chunk of knit in space. You can see that morph attribute is the bias value in the mix, because as I said, it's just position mixing from one over here to here. Now I'm going to just jump back up and put the finishing touches on what would eventually be that look that I showed you in the render at the start. So I just took a couple of rows just to speed it up, again assigning that primitive ID. And I jump into this for each again, and I probably shouldn't have left this in because it complicates things, but I've just got a low and a high res switch, so however many points are in that circle is how many threads around that are swept around the main backbone. And you'll see that in a second when I sweep it. So yeah, zoom in here and you can see that that's how you determine like how many you've got. And I didn't even have to control this sweep by attributes. I just used the defaults like the twist and scale. You don't really need to do anything fancy with that. It's pretty simple stuff. And then I did another version off to the side, so I can morph between like a really tight version and then this fatter, more jittery version. Okay, and then what I do is I create a rest position for the fatter one and one for the skinny. So I've got that stored away there. And then I make them straight again, as you saw in the previous example. And so again, the final state is a bunch of straight lines. Bit of repetition here. We move it off to the side, assign the duration and all that sort of stuff that we want. And then, so this changes a bit. So this first section here, we're just going from, the lines up in the corner, back down into the fatter threads, you'll see. Because there's like a two-stage morph here, and that's how you get the look, get it looking more interesting. You can see that if you look at it side on. So first we take care of just that big position shift. And then we go back to where they were straight, and I restore the, which rest position is that actually? Yeah, so it's the original, but the fatter version. So I restore that back. And what I want to do here is modulate or blend between the really thin version, which is still swept, and the fat one, but it's not going to be like shifting positions from here to here anymore. It's just happening on that flat surface. And then ultimately they get blended together, so it's like a multi-stage blend. So you can see here. And this is how like effects work, in my opinion, how effects end up looking nice is just layering things, chipping away at it and just adding bits and pieces as you go to get that detail. Nothing usually ever comes out of a system that looks super good if it doesn't have some kind of layering or variation to it. So I'm always trying to build that into my setups by default, lots of variation. Then I do this other thing, take another VOP and I just add some 4D noise to the current position and animate it. It looks like rubbish like that, weird. There's no smoothness or anything. You can see there, and I'm randomizing, what am I randomizing? Something. I'm adding some randomness into, that's what it is, how much it's displaced, which gives you those big loops and some little tight ones in there. So 4D noise added to position, and that just gives you the ability now to mix that back in. I hope this isn't too confusing. So if we have a look now, hopefully you can clearly see what I'm getting at here with this layering and adding different components to this. So it still looks a bit weird. It's not smooth or anything. And I'm just playing with how much it gets displaced. And do I want it to even be animated or not? See, I've turned off the animation now. It's a bit more static. It's not displaced as much. But, in the end, that's a good thing about this. You've got choices. I think with effects, that's just an important thing to take away, is that's the thing you want to have are choices, and that's why Houdini's so good. And here we are, like, morphing those two sides together. Okay, so it's going to look a lot better in a minute, I promise. Looks a bit spiderish. So it kind of looks weird on the side, you can see. Like it looks like it goes real skinny to fat quite abruptly. You can control all the blending and stuff back up on that asset. If anyone wants me to explain that in person later on, the whole asset thing, I can do that as well. I think I'm just checking over things right now. Okay, I'm going to talk about the surface ripple now. So we've got these flat, like knits, right? Or threads or whatever they are. They're just flat. And I use the match size, I take a grid and I just match it with the match size node to that thing there. You can see now it's templated. They're in the same space. And I just do 2 ripples. One's never enough. So you could do this like with VOPs, anything. Again, it's just a quick thing. One's okay, but 2's better. You just merge them together and get a different result. And then it's just a pointer form. So you just take the original source knit, take a rest frame, and merge it with the animated version. Merge in the animated version. And there you've got, the wavering knit. It takes quite a speed hit, I guess, with the pointer form, but it gets the job done. It looks good. So I've got the final morph with the curvature now, or the waviness. Feels a bit slow watching this back now, but for the 100th time if you didn't already catch it. But you can see that the different transitions there. See it go like loose, then it sort of goes tight, then back, and it rests. At least that was the goal. It's like a faux sort of dynamics. It seems to work pretty good though. But this stuff really comes into its own when you render it, of course. So with P-scale, I just grab the second, there's a morph to attribute on that right side chain, which handles the large small morph. I grab that and I basically put it into this wrangle, so I wanted to use that to drive the P-scale. I didn't explain that, but the asset on that right side had a morph to attribute, so I've stolen that to use for my P-scale here, and I'm attribute blurring this. I love this node. I use this all the time in combination with smooth sometimes. But see how much difference it adds to the threads. It just calms them down and makes them look way cooler. And you can do as much smoothing as you want or not, whatever you want. I just did like a random per primitive color, just so I could visualize that a little bit more. I know there's other ways to visualize curves with hair nodes and stuff like that as well, but this seemed to do the trick. So yeah, I'm not sure how simple that seems or whatever, but it seems pretty a fairly stripped back system to me. But yeah, it's basically the heart and soul of what's going on here, just multiple layers of morphing. There we go, real time. Yeah, to get that result, and then you slap a poly wire on it, which you wouldn't do. You'd do it at render time. But again, you can see the levels. You've got the tight stuff in the middle and the looser stuff at the left-hand side up the top there. So yeah, that's it. That's how you can air knit stuff in Houdini. It's one way anyway. There's many ways. How am I going for time here? Yep, cool. All right, so what I'm going to talk about now is another old thing I built. I call it layered destruction, I guess. But what it is, let me just do this real simply for you. So usually when you're doing destruction in Houdini, like the typical thing to do is just break a thing a heap of times, as many times as you need, and do it in the most interesting way possible. Like, you know, use shatter, then use shatter Boolean shatter node, sorry. There's a ton of different ways to do it with Voronoi and get tricks, use tricks to make it look displaced or whatever. But I always wanted to do this thing where I could just take an object and go, let's shatter it 3, 53, 618, 10,500, all in the one time. So I just, yeah, to do it just as one, I was never happy with that, you know what I mean? But I wanted to do it not like this, where it's just like boom, 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 boom. I wanted to do it more like this, where I could just sort of ease into it and take it to dust. So, yeah, I created this, again, 2 years ago or something, this super old setup that nearly gave me a heart attack when I opened it. I thought that I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not rebuilding that. It's going to hurt somebody. So, sorry. So I did rebuild it though. I'm just going to show you what it is basically. It's a long network. Sorry, did you say 10 minutes? 13? Oh, damn, I'm going to have to do it. Okay. All right. So what I used here, and that last example, I think I just kept it a box to hopefully just show it in a way that's just more obvious as to what's going on. Because like I said, there's a ton of ways to break stuff and do it like that. But I just wanted this to be different. So yeah, let me try and do this. So I'll just step through this network. Like I said, it is quite long. I think I'll try and just explain like the main core concept behind this. Oh, I also wanted this to be more of a system that works with a shelled object, something with thickness, rather than just like, you know, the full chunky geometry, because I think it just looked nicer. I won't go through all the nodes actually now that I look at it, because it's just too hardcore to explain. But I think I might even, see if I can pause this for a second, explain something. You know, when you use the shatter in Houdini, if you've used it, which I'm sure some of you have, it's awesome, but like when I was doing this and I wanted to break this into discrete little layers, I guess, with shatter I found, because I'm going to be like stepping through each piece in a loop, like I'd end up with too many small, like the variation was the opposite to what you normally want. Like you want a lot of variation normally, but I wanted to like figure out a way to break it with the nice edges and stuff, but have like a way to govern sort of the sizes, if that makes sense. So what I did was I used a combination of shatter and Voronoi, but I used Voronoi in this different way. And what I did was I created a convex hull from the object, which it just looks like a box here, but I turned on the mountain so you could see it. So it does a convex hull, right? And then like I Voronoi that, because the good thing about the Voronoi is that the distribution's like super even if you want it to be. So that's what I wanted. I scaled up that object a little bit too, just to make sure everything was getting cut. So here comes the Voronoi. So I cut it up into X amount of pieces, then I keep everything I just keep the inside. I clean it because you've got duplicates on top of one another. I remesh it because I'm going to displace it, so I get more interesting cutting objects. So I basically just use it to create cutters, if I'm going to get to the point. So you just see I'm adding a noise to position. Okay. And then, so that's my cutter setup, and now I've got full control over like the cutters and how many, like what it looks like, all that sort of stuff, and then so I Boolean shadow that, and see the key is here is to create this connectivity attribute here, which I'm calling level 1, and that's important because I'm going to push that through the whole system down to the end, so I can maintain those the whole way down. So there's my initial break. I want to have like 3 pieces, so I've got 3 pieces, and so then what I do is I come down, and I'm not doing any shattering in the loops. I found every time I did that, stuff just broke, and it was hard to control. So the next level is shatter again. It's the same technique. I put in a high-low switch just for, because this would eventually get piped out into a digital asset. Again, never got to that point. I was scared enough as it is to rebuild this thing. It was bad. So you can see doing the same thing again, but of course there's more cutters this time, remeshing, displacing, blah, 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 does it again. But the thing that's happening here, which is the critical part of keeping these layers intact as you go down and you keep breaking, is this attribute transfer, believe it or not, inside the loop. So there is a loop happening, but I'm not cutting within the loop, if that makes sense. I'm just transferring back the L1 attribute to the pieces that previously existed. And then I cut that up again, and the loop finishes, and you'll see, I think I show it. You've got to rename everything again after you break it because it gets all wacky. And so I created the level 2 connectivity, you can see just there. And I'm constantly reassigning normals and stuff, but there you go. So there's level 2, done. I don't, from here, I just do Voronoi. Because, like I said, it got too messy when I started to loop through all these and tried to shatter them. I didn't think it really needed it. In this loop, actually, I'm doing a measure. I'm checking the area on the pieces because I want to make sure when I go through the next iteration, I want to take the small bits out of the equation, and I create a threshold with a wrangle based on the area. Are you going to be in the next loops or not? And there's just like a safeguard type thing. You can see here the green ones are the small pieces. They're the ones I want to kick out, or not kick out, but just put off to the side and merge them back in after the next iteration, because if I start to add them in, it'll go south pretty quick. You just add up with too many clusters of tiny, tiny pieces. So just going through, I told you it's long. Just going through, just sort of inspecting this to just make sure nothing looks weird. This is where I split it out to large and small. The right-hand side looks like it's the large section, and I'm going to break them again. As I said, the left, keep them out to the side. They're the small guys. We'll just merge them back in at the end. And this one's a straight Voronoi, like it's just a scatter. I did this, the stretch technique, scale technique, where you pre-scale it before it breaks and then suck it back, and you get like long pieces and stuff. That's cool. So, and then attribute transferring those 2 previous levels back on, because you've got to remember you've got to keep those guys intact, or you're not going to get access to them later cleanly to create your layered constraints, because there's a level 3 being applied. I'll show you the levels again here. So 3, there you can see like it's significantly different from the other guys, and there's 2 and 1. Yeah, when I said layer destruction at the start, what I'm more so referring to is not the destruction being the pieces being layered. It's more about the constraints that are layered, the glue constraints. And then, yeah, just doing it again, level 4 this time. And then transferring back 1, 2, and 3. Hopefully speed this up. So it's starting to look pretty nasty, like lots of pieces. And this will be the final amount of pieces. It doesn't have to be the final amount. You can keep going if you want. You can like scatter way more points up above and do whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. It's not a super slow system either. Like I know there's a lot of loops and stuff, but it works pretty good. And then let's just do another loop just for fun, because while we're going, I've only got about 20. I'm gonna UV the inside faces, because I've lost all, by this point, it's all gone to hell and I've got nothing. So I'll UV the inside faces, and it all works, it's good. The outside's already UV'd from way up at the start. Usually a good idea to do that before you break anything. So now I'm set, I've got inside, outside UVs. That's again looking at those small bits. And here we go, like we're done with the breaking now. There's a little interface I built, like just a proxy thing to tell me how many points we're gonna be on each level. The small group threshold, which will keep small or discard. And preview mode activates those switch nodes, which you might have seen up above. It said low and high, just for like speed to iterate through as you're sort of deving it. So yeah, this changes a bit now. We go into handling the constraints. And this is, of course, where you need those levels. So we go into the first one here, and it's just going to give you the first chunk of level 1. And we just use connect adjacent pieces just to create some primitives. And it's got some settings there. Adjacent points from adjacent pieces from surface points is the mode. But if you look at the constraints, you might not be able to. There's perfect separation between the pieces, and that's what matters. And assigning like the attributes to those with a wrangle before they go into DOPs, or else it won't know what's going on. Again, my asset to just eat these things away over time. As I said, it's a lifesaver in terms of time and all that. Getting stuff like this done, and then just blasting away the stuff that's not needed. And essentially, you've just got this happening for you don't need this on the 4th level, obviously, because at that point everything's let go and it's just free to do its thing. But yeah, I kind of did a similar thing with the asset on the second layer there and gave it a time offset rather than do it like hard coded into the asset itself. Just it felt like the right thing to do, like keep a similar noise pattern. But the look of this can get really interesting when you do vary these up quite a lot. So yeah, just showing me sort of dive through each set of this. And at the end, hopefully you can see this. Can you see the 3 colors? Yep. That's what it looks like in DOPs. It's just chewing away at it layer by layer until it lets it go. And this looks like it's the geometry side of things. Oh, actually, no, what this is, I did another layer on top of this, which is a particle layer. So you could break this thing down to whatever, as much as you want. Of course, you're going to get a speed hit, but I decided to add another option to turn this into particles at a certain point, which is actually what was in that marble textured box that went down to, well, it had gold on it, basically gold on the inner faces. So yeah, I added that in there just in case you had to turn something like this around super quick or whatever, and you didn't really want to spend the time doing it just with the pieces. This is the constraint or the DOPS side of it. It's super easy, like it's just a pop force in this example with some drag on it. And you can see the constraint network there with level 1, 2, and 3. It plugs in, and I'm overriding the, I don't know the name of it. It just said overwrite something or other. And that's the option that basically lets you animate the constraints or updates the constraints per time step. And if you don't have that on, if you delete the constraints, it won't work, basically. So I think well, this is showing what sort of speed you'd expect out of it. And it's not super bad, like considering there's 10,500 pieces, I think it's pretty good. You've got shattered edges and stuff, which is cool, and a ton of variety in the way that it comes apart. Here you can just visualize the constraints. So you can check it out in that view too if you like. I chose to cache these out before I rendered them or whatever, just because the number was pretty decent. This is after I've got all that stuff cached. I'm just showing the it will move across to the particle side of it. I don't know how evident that is there, that there are layers. Hopefully it's obvious. It's getting broken down over time. So here I'm killing out certain pieces. I'm actually saying, like, give me the pieces that are already at like level 3 or whatever, because I don't want to like turn anything else into particles prior to that. So that just gives me those guys. And then I did this thing in a wrangle where I just created a random frame within a range of frames. So I said between, I don't know what that is. Can't read that. It's like 200 and 265. Just blink on and off, basically. And just spit out some particles like that. Super straightforward and not technical at all. And then it just goes into a particle sim, which is pretty much default settings. And I use redshift instancing to throw a rock on there with random p-scale and random orientation. And that's essentially the very last stop in terms of layering with that. Hopefully I'll show that here. There we go. So you can, again, do as much of that as you want, or as little. If you want to visualize that, I'll usually just have this off to the side just to check it out. And I'll typically throw a random color per point or something on there and just multiply that in the shaders to just give it some variation. I think that's it. I'm done. Thanks, guys. Does anyone have any questions?
I've got
Hey
one
man,
for
how you
you.
doing?
All right. Quick question about the refractoring approach you just showed. Really cool stuff. And I was wondering if you've played around with trying to render that with a refractored material, and if there's any workflow for essentially fusing and cleaning up the unfractured intersections before the fracture occurs.
Yeah, it's always a problem, yeah. I haven't with that particular setup, but typically I'll usually like bring on like the inside faces, like say if it was, being eaten away left to right or whatever, I'd have those inside faces not present and just bring them on as the effect wipes on or whatever, you know what I mean? Like I never found another way to really avoid that. So yeah, that's what I've done in the past.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Cheers, man. No one else? All right, cheers guys. Thanks so much for checking this out. I appreciate your time coming along, and yeah, if anyone wants to chat afterwards, just come and hit me up and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.